Everybody talks about collaboration and how do we work well together. But what does it take to really collaborate, to co-create really something that is meaningful without control, or really it collapsing to feel like a junior high group project? What does that even look like? And we are exploring joyosity in practice in this series on the Joyosity podcast, because leadership doesn't fall apart in the big moments. It's these quiet, small times where we're under pressure, we're in the room, and sometimes this little sneaky voice that's saying, you're supposed to have figured this out by now. And I think that's also where joy is the most misunderstood. Why does joy come into this area of leadership? And so joy isn't optimism. It's not pretending things are fine. It's definitely not toxic positivity or a reward for getting everything right. Joyosity and joy are cultivated. It's a practice, one that leaders return to when the pressure is real and the stakes are high, and those old ways, like pushing harder, hustling, just don't work anymore. And so, as I said, this season, we're taking joyosity out of the book and into practice and lived experiences with real leaders, real tension, real creation, and moments where staying human and cultivating joy is the best leadership move. So if you've heard me talk maybe a little bit about my book, but if you haven't seen these beautiful covers, what I'm so excited about today is the idea of collaboration as a leadership art. And my designer of my covers, Catherine Casalino, lives that truth every day. She's been working in publishing as an art director and designing book covers for decades, including, as I said, these beauties, because they're so pretty. Okay, I'm not going to go on about that, but I am so excited that she's here because as the creative director and founder at Casalino Design, she really understands how great work happens. She has to listen, she has to iterate and understand shared ownership, which is really the center of a joyful way of collaboration. And so if you're like, I'm not a designer, this conversation is not much about design, because Jenn Whitmer, not a designer, but I imagine that you have some type of work where collaboration matters. Even if it's with the finance department and HR, you have got to work together with other people. And so we're going to talk today with Catherine about how to create and how do we create things that are meaningful together. So let's welcome Catherine. Yay. Oh, wait, my fault. Go on now.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jen.
I am really excited that you said yes to this. I mean, I know obviously we have worked together and I've had, direct firsthand experience of collaborating with you, but I think your process was so enjoyable to me. And I think that we worked so well together. I just wanted to give people a little bit more of your brilliance.
Oh, thank you.
How you create such amazing work, including, I forgot to say in the intro, all of the book covers in the movie American Fiction. So you have done so many, many covers for so many different types of work and dealing with all kinds of different people. So before I jump into all my deep questions, tell the people, how did you get here? How did you decide design and book design and come to doing this type of work?
Yeah, so my path was kind of non-linear.
Most people's are.
Yeah, I was always a really creative person. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, I was, taking pictures, drawing, making videos with my friends. I was always doing creative stuff. But I wasn't really sure that was going to be my career. I ended up going to college for English and history, and that's what I studied there. I was an English major and a history minor, and I wrote creative writing. I did poetry, but I always did photography and other creative things on the side. I would say almost as a, as a pressure release, really. It was something that I enjoyed doing. I thought, I liked working with my hands and kind of doing that stuff. So when I was in college, I was at William and Mary in Virginia, and they didn't have photography classes, but they had a school newspaper. And so I ended up becoming the photo editor for the school newspaper and working in the darkroom. And at that time, we were starting to transition into digital. So most of the time I was shooting film, I was developing my own film in the darkroom, and it was very old school. You didn't know if you got the shot of the football game until you pulled out the roll
The
of film. Yeah, it was
pressure.
high pressure. And then I think maybe my junior year, they had enough money to buy a digital camera for the newspaper. And it was kind of the beginning. Like I could never afford, as a lay
Sure.
person at that time, the digital cameras were so expensive. So it was great because I got to use this equipment. And that kind of brought me into graphic design. Whereas I learned Photoshop, I learned digital processes pretty early. I came to New York after I graduated, and I took a summer program at NYU that's for publishing. And they still run this program. It's just like a very intensive 2-month thing where you learn about magazines and you learn about book publishing. And I kind of thought I'm going to work for a magazine. At the time, I wanted to work for like Rolling Stone or Nylon, like something cool.
Yeah.
And then 2 people came in and talked about book covers during the book publishing session. And I thought, well, that's a really interesting job. Like, I have an English major. I love books. I love to read. I understand, layouts. And I just kind of reached out to them and said, I do photography. I could do research. I could do Photoshop. And one of the people wrote back to me and said they were looking for an intern. And so that's how I got into graphic design. It was a very falling into a curiosity, I suppose.
What I love about that story, though, is exactly what you just said, falling into a curiosity. Like you had all of this experience. Last January, Jade Simmons was on the podcast, and she talks about bringing everything that you've had in your past experience along with you, that it's been preparing you for the thing that you didn't even know existed. Like I didn't know that my job existed as a speaker and a consultant in 8-10 years ago when I started doing this. I had no idea.
Right.
And so your curiosity led you into something, but you'd already been preparing for it in so many ways.
I completely, that resonates with me so much because it made sense. Like I had been reading books my whole life. I had, been curious. I'd been into art, but it just kind of dovetailed in a really nice way for me where I thought, oh, I'm responding to something. I never really thought of myself as a fine artist. I think there's a huge difference between people who do commercial art and fine art. Like I have a friend who's a painter, and I remember, being in his studio at one point, and he would just come in and paint whatever he wanted every day. And I was like, how do you know what to do? And it's because like I'm responding to somebody else. Like I am reading a book and it might be something I know nothing about, but I'm curious. And so I'm responding to that. And I think that was a nice thing to discover a career where that was a skill I could use,
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then, like you said, there's so much power in what designers do, because I think you are translating something as a client comes to you and it's like, well, I kind of like blue and I want it to do this. It can be so vague. Direction can be so unsure. And I think designers are such a key piece of the collaboration process, even if not just graphic designers, which is specifically what you do, but all kinds of designers, project managers, people who are helping move something along from a nebulous idea into something that people either see, touch, buy, understand. Like there's so much in that process. And the other thing that the fine artist does have to do a little bit, but not to the extent that you do, is that collaboration. Like you're not out there on your own. So so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think translation is the perfect word for it. And I find that like my background in literature really helped in the publishing houses because I was able to read the book and, respond to it as almost a first reader. Like when you're in a publishing house, I worked at Random House and Hachette and Simon & Schuster, you have these people who have paid money to publish a book, they're excited about it, but they're really close to it. And so the cover designer is almost the first person that gets the book who's like, I didn't pick up the book of my own volition. It might not be a topic I'm interested in, but what do I see as a first reader
Mhm.
in a way? And I think that's a really a fun place to be, because you're taking something that's a written creativity and you're translating it into a visual creativity. And
Mhm.
so it was always nice to have that language where I could say, oh, this is a Southern Gothic book, or I really think this book relates to, the tipping point, and how can we thread that needle in that place. So knowing literature was really helpful for me to help translate, because you often see young designers who they have their own style that they want to impose upon everything they work on.
Mhm.
And I think some people have really amazing careers where they have a style, they apply it, people go to them for that style. That's not me. I'm
Yeah.
like, all my
There's
work is
2
all over the place, like so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's 2 different talents there and skill sets
Yep.
to consistently not impose, but to consistently create something within a style is is one type of challenge. To remove yourself and translate and reflect the product or the direction without it, it's still obviously you, but
Right.
it's not a reflection in the same way that that style is. It's really a different skill set.
It's a totally different skill set. Like, people go to somebody like Annie Leibovitz because they want her style of photography,
Sure.
right? And I
Mhm.
think that's a good thing to know as you're working with creatives. Like, are you going to the person because you trust their vision, or are you going to the person because you want to collaborate? Or, I think
Mhm.
there's different ways of working with creatives. And I have clients that are like, come up with whatever you think will work. And there's clients that are like, I really know that it needs to be, serious. I want it to feel strong. They have I like to ask people about the mood of a project, because
Mhm.
that really helps guide me and how the visuals will look. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a translation. Even like sitting in meetings, listening to people have reactions to things. You have to figure out how that translates to the visuals. So I was in a meeting at one point where somebody said, I don't like that person on the book cover. They seem really arrogant. And I was like, what is, like, why? Like, I'm trying to figure out why. And then we started showing other images from the photo shoot. And when the person did not have a hat on, they liked it better. And so I was like, oh, it's the hat. Something about the hat makes you think that they're arrogant or full of themselves or show offy, but when they don't have a hat on. So it's like sometimes you're kind of trying to figure out why people are reacting to things. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that actually really leads me into a question I wanted to ask you. When, in so many workplaces, there is collaboration. It's like you see it on the website, it's part of their hiring process. And then you get into this meeting and nobody really knows how to collaborate. At least that has been some of my experience where I come in and help people understand
Yeah.
how to collaborate better. And so when an author first comes to you with a book and you're in that initial design meeting, what are you listening for that they don't always realize they're communicating? Because for an author, you know, people say that to not judge a book by their cover. I mean, that's exactly what I do. I mean, I'm an author and I know I judge the book by the cover.
Yeah.
So what are you listening for that is that pressure for the author because they know this book's going to get judged, but you're in this early design stage where it's not going to be perfect or final the first time. What are you listening for? What are you hoping to get what they're not necessarily explicitly communicating?
Yeah. In the initial meetings, I'm always kind of listening for what is the heart of the project, like, what are they trying to get across? And even more important, not necessarily what the author, um, their likes and dislikes, but what their audience is going to like. Because I think
Mm,
that's a very confusing thing for a lot of people, where if, I don't like the color blue, I'm going to say I don't like blue, but blue might be the best color for your cover because there's 30 books out there that are blue, or, and that
mhm,
signals the specific genre. So sometimes it's like me listening to what they're saying, but also saying, okay, I think that's um that's a personal preference, or okay, I know that there's other books out there that do things. I think the initial meeting is just kind of a lot of listening. I really I
Mhm.
take notes, I listen, and then I kind of, then afterwards, I often will match that against my impressions, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of times it's aligned. Like I'll read the manuscript or the tip sheet or the information that comes from the book. A lot of times there's marketing material, and I'll read that and I'll have an idea in my head. Like, I think this book is, you know, a business book that needs to be fun and authoritative, or I'll have kind of just those little things in my head. And then when I hear from the author, maybe they'll say something different, and I'm like, oh wow, when we're having this conversation, they're really academic. Like, they want the academic audience also to be interested. So yeah, it's a lot of listening for those little things that they,
Mhm.
what's important to them. um I often will say with designers, like, you kind of discount the visual ideas that authors will come up with, because a lot of the times they're very, there's something that's been done before, right? So I'll
Mhm.
kind of put that in I'll write it down and listen, but I'm like, okay, I think we can do better. Like, I get that you want a brain on the cover because it's about thoughts, but like, I
Mhm.
don't, that's very obvious, right? So it's
Mhm.
also up to me to kind of weed those things out when they come up with suggestions, to say, I hear what you're saying, this is about thought. Maybe a brain isn't the best. We
Mhm.
could do something cool. We could merge that idea with something else and make it unique, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, one of the things you're talking about is listening is a key piece of your expertise.
Oh
It's
yeah.
not just like the digital knowledge of how to make the balloon on my cover deflated where the other balloons are inflated.
Right.
Like, that's technical skill, but listening is what I like to call a people power skill. It's not a soft skill. And so it's part of your expertise and a key piece of collaboration. So
Yes.
when people come to you and you're in early, maybe not the initial meeting, but earlier stages, what is a signal that collaboration is going to struggle because of talent? Like, you're listening for
Mm.
things. What are the things that go, oh, wait, this, we're going to either need to address this, or I'm going to need to figure out how to work around this because this communication, or we're struggling in this collaboration?
Yeah, I think the things that are struggle points is, um visuals are so accessible nowadays. And so, like, if people they're like, oh, I designed something myself, or I sketched something up, so that's always like, oh, okay. And I think it's always just about respecting their instinct to help, but at the same time, like, saying,
Mm.
you know, I've got this. Like, I see what you're trying to do here. Because sometimes an author will do something like that and go rogue and design their own cover, or like have their sister's friend who goes to art school do something, and you're like, okay, I see what you're trying to do here. Maybe we can incorporate that in a way that still looks professional, or that is not, doesn't look like student work, right? So, because
Mhm.
I can see those minutia, I can see the difference. So that, I feel like that's a struggle point. The other thing I would say with books is, you're taking something that's thousands of words, and you're distilling it, right? You're
Mhm.
distilling it into one visual, and the visual can't say everything. And so that's kind of another thing that I talk to people about. They're like, well, it needs to signal, romance, but it also needs to signal struggle and sadness. And you're like, okay, that's a lot of things to signal. Like, we can't tell the whole story in one image, and it's
Mm.
not a movie. I think sometimes people will
Right.
be like, and she's walking onto the thing. I'm like, there's no walking. It's still,
It's
you
still.
know, it's one picture. So it's oftentimes kind of saying, like, we're going to come up with something that will inspire people to pick your book up. Like,
Mhm.
this is a signal, this is branding, right? So it
Mhm.
can't tell the whole story. um I think so. Those are things where they want everything on the cover. I would say the other very early signal to me that there's a problem is if your title or subtitle are not clear. Like, that's
Mm.
something where I'll see right away as a designer. I'm like, ooh, there's a lot of words here. They all kind of don't mean a lot. I think nonfiction
As I'd like
struggles.
to call word salad.
Yeah, it's like, you know how you go into a gallery and they have a description of the art and you're like, what does that even mean? Sometimes people will fall into that. And then I have to, as a creative person, signal that to the editorial team like, hey, I'm not sure what this book, where you're leaning into, or what this means. Your
Mhm.
title is confusing, or so those are other things where as a creative director, like, it's an uncomfortable position to be in, to say to the editor like, hey, you might need to rework this subtitle. I'm not sure, you have mixed metaphors that are going to be confusing if we lean into those visually, so what are we doing here,
Yeah.
but it's
Well,
good
it's so
to
good.
tackle that early.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think those struggles are actually extrapolated out into all kinds of other work are actually really common, because the first one is and because I am guilty, hopefully with lots of the caveats that I sent you when we were working on the playbook. I was like, okay, so here are I'm not even going to call them designs. Like, I can't call them designs, but the ideas that I randomly, so I can communicate a little bit better what I'm looking for, but
Yes.
please make this so much better because these are not designs. But that feels like I don't really know how to communicate what I want,
Yes.
more than I am so attached to something. And sometimes that's really hard for leaders. They walk into a collaboration and they're really attached to a certain part that is not actually the big idea. And I think leaders can get caught up in that. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, the other two, are so important as well, because that idea around the lack of clarity as well. So sometimes you're too attached to one thing that doesn't matter as much, or you're not clear at all about where you're going. And that in a collaboration makes things really difficult for any project that you are working on. And I have a coaching client who is basically a chief technology officer, and he's switched roles into a new organization, and they have a product that they're working on. So he's a coder and a people manager, obviously not designing books, but still there's a lot of collaboration that's happening. And noticing that, oh, this one product that we designed, we're trying to make it do everything. That other piece of your design, you're like, well, it can't signal everything. This one thing can't do everything. And that happens in all kinds of places that we have to watch out for. And I think I think that I wanted to draw that connection because, again, it's not just about design, it's how we collaborate together. Design is just such a perfect illustration.
Oh my God.
And so one of the things that you said that I want to ask you more about is that feedback piece. Like, so you're giving feedback not just to the author, but also to the editorial team, more people who are in the collaboration. What's the difference for you that when they're giving feedback about your design, what's the difference between receiving and giving that feedback and protecting your ego around the design? How do you navigate that?
That's so hard. And I think it comes with time. Like, I remember, very early on in my career where I would labor over something and it would get rejected. And I would just be like, oh my God, like, it just would break your heart, And I think that the feedback for me at this point is much easier to navigate because I've gone through it. And I also know that there are so many solutions to a problem, right? Like, you could have, like, when I'm coming up with cover designs, like, any of them could work, right? I mean, I'm never going to present anything to a client that's like wildly inappropriate for their cover, that it's not, it's like,
Right. You're probably going to have some favorites, but nothing that you're not like going to go out there.
And also, like, as a designer too, I think it's important to, swing for the fences. There's times where I have proposed things for covers that were really bold, and the client was too afraid to go in a fresh direction, right? So, like, and that's okay. Like, as a designer, you have to, that's the process, right? So getting it on the cover, I think that there's the feedback stuff. You're all in the same team at the end of the day, right? And you want the author to be happy. Like, they've spent, I think you have to have empathy in this process, because this person has spent years of their lives working on a book, right? And they want it to be perfect, and they're nervous, like, especially if it's a first-time author. They have a lot of nerves surrounding it. You know, maybe they think they've written the next great American novel and they're just like, they're pinning all their hopes and excitement on the book. And
Mm-hmm.
as the cover designer, you really have to respect how they feel. Like if you present a cover for them and they don't love it, like that's not about you. You
Mm-hmm.
know? And so I think the feedback, I just never take it personally. I will guide. If I think the feedback doesn't make sense, I'll ask questions, I'll guide them. Um, you know, hey, I see that you're shying away from, you know, the covers with big type. Is that something you don't want? You know, like I'll try to
Mm-hmm.
understand why. Um, but yeah, it takes time to not take it personally. I think is a
Yeah.
big thing.
Well,
Yeah.
it's and I don't think it's just creative people. I used to consult for an advertising agency. And so I wasn't really in the strategy department. I wasn't really in the creative department. I wasn't really in account service. I was kind of working with them on writing and some other things. One of the things I noticed though, that idea of trying to get more information, like help me understand where this feedback is coming from, was always really helpful. It didn't matter who was the person asking that. Like it didn't
Right.
have to come from the designer. But designers who were really attached to their designs, like, no, this is the best. There is this line between fighting for the strategic direction and something that just looks trendy, like, so they were
Yes.
balancing that a lot. And account service is always balancing fighting for the strategic direction and wanting to make the client happy. Like those
Yeah,
things are
and
all
all of
happening at
those
the same time.
things, yeah, all of those things should be happening. Like I think that
Mhm.
you see designers who are showing things that got rejected, and I'm like, well, part of the job is not to just create something beautiful, but also to make it useful. This is communication design, right? So like you're
Mhm.
communicating something, you want it to stand out in the marketplace, like it needs to do all of those things to be successful. So yeah, you can always go back to the drawing board and come up with something else.
Mhm.
I think feedback is always just an opportunity to learn something more. I really do. Like you just, how else can we solve this problem? I had a job I worked on early in my career where I knew that it was like a humorous book. I can't remember the title now, but I knew the symbol should be a thumbs up on the cover. I was just like, it's got to be a thumbs up. Like this is the right image for this book. And like I showed it and my creative director was like, no, like, and I was like, I know this is the right symbol. And it ended up that we actually had someone in our department who was a cartoon artist, and he ended up drawing it, and that solved the problem. So like
Mm.
the creative director was rejecting the photographic version because he didn't like seeing a hand that was actually a real hand. But when we did it
Mhm.
as an illustration, that was it, that solved the problem. So sometimes it's kind of like asking people like, what do you not like about it? And then they're like, well, I think it's, it feels too strong or in your face, or oh, okay, maybe we shouldn't use neon. So you have to interpret those things. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think you can't take it personally. I mean, at this
Yeah.
point too, I've done thousands of covers over the course of my career, and sometimes obviously you want to nail it on the first round or on the second round, but sometimes when you go back to the drawing board, you come up with something really cool. I also
Yeah.
I really advocate for buy-in and communication early in the process with clients,
Mm.
because I think when people kind of go off into their corner, and do work without having that buy-in and communication early, you miss something.
Mm.
Artists we have this preconceived notion of like, you go into your studio and you work, and I just think you have to have those early conversations about what are you working on, and let them know. Like I would, and when I was in-house, I would always like share my ideas right away with my publisher. Just like, hey,
Mhm.
I know I have this illustrator I've been dying to use. I think they'd be great for this book. What do you think? Like, and they'd be like, oh, cool. Like, let's see some sketches. So I always tried to get that early enthusiasm with the
Mhm.
authors and publisher.
One of the things I think that that demonstrates is the power of the iterative process that is collaboration. Like there isn't, like you said, everybody wants to nail it the first time. Of
Yeah.
course we do. Like we
Yeah.
just want, that's just like who we are as people. But there is always a process of iteration. It doesn't matter what you're collaborating on. The first time out is never going to be the best. In fact, I talked about this in another podcast earlier, but like this sign right there says
Yeah.
the only job of the first draft is to exist. And I wrote it down and I carried it with me everywhere I wrote when I was writing the book. Like I
Yes.
had writing retreats, whenever I put it out, it came out. And my husband framed it for me for Christmas because it just is such a reminder that that the creative process of creating anything. And so it doesn't matter if you're creating an ad, a book cover, a digital product, whatever you're producing is creating something, and it's going to adjust over time. And like you said, sometimes you discover really amazing things when you continue to ask questions and you try. And that leadership skill of allowing, it's not failure, but some people think it's failure, but allowing the process of evolution is so important in collaboration.
Oh my God. I fully agree. I think that even sharing early and getting feedback, like even if you're half baked with your ideas, I think there's so many times where the projects that I have where it was like a grand slam on the first round was because I'd done all that work ahead of time. So there was, like I showed my creative director what I was thinking. I tested things out. I was everybody, you were building up the excitement for the project, and then people help. Like I worked on a cover really early in my career that had the concept was shadow puppets, and I came up with the idea. I like did a really rudimentary photo shoot for it and showed my creative director, and she was like, wow, this is great. And I told her, in the book there's these shadow puppets, it's really creepy. It was kind of a scary suspenseful book. And she said, I actually have a shadow puppet that my sister brought back from Asia, and let's put that into the. So like we rebuilt the set. When I showed that, it was one design. I showed one thing and it got approved immediately because everybody was so excited and had buy-in and helped me improve the process that it was like it was a one and done. And I think as you move from a junior level position as a creative where you're kind of doing everything yourself to higher level creative director where you're hiring photographers and illustrators and other professionals, like there's so much success to be had in those back and forth moments. Like I mean my dream projects are the ones where I've gotten to work with amazing food photographer, an amazing stylist, like an amazing chef. Like everybody has ideas and they bring their best to the table.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so great about when people are coming with a strong point of view, but also the lack of ego. Like I'm coming with my expertise. Here's the thing that I'm bringing, but I'm also, as you said, we're all out. We're all on the same team. We're all out for this to look good, to be the thing that goes well, because everybody wants to be successful together. I feel like if you remember that, and then you start respecting the points of view, because if the food designer says, well, food doesn't really look like that, like it's you have something different. And I think that's what's so powerful about it. And what my experience with you, they had asked me, first of all, they said you have to go to the bookstore. And I was like, okay, twist my arm. But like choose covers that you liked and didn't like. And my kids went to the store and we all had all of these things. And I gave you probably I don't remember how many pages of covers of like, here's things I like, here's things I don't like. I wasn't rude, but I was definitely critical of like, this one looks like a sad summer camp poster. Like, I don't want a book that looks like that, or whatever. I gave some other context to it, which is that early feedback. And so when you came back with the first set of like, I don't know, 7 or 8, we narrowed it down to 2 in the first meeting. And I think that
Yeah.
is because of all of that early, what you asked for or what Idea Press asked for early
Yes.
on was that early feedback that you didn't go away into your studio and creative, bubble without the ingredients of what you were working on. And so it feels
100%.
so
Yeah.
powerful.
We had that initial meeting, and like that's one of the things I like to ask clients is, what do you like visually? Go to the bookstore, because that also pulls you out of your own project and also to see what the marketplace is. Like
Yeah.
as a creative director, and also my husband is a creative director in book publishing. So the two of us are at bookstores constantly, and we have thousands and thousands of books. So it's like we're always looking at everything. And I think it's
Mhm.
a nice step to start to say to somebody, you've written a book now, look, like you haven't really thought maybe about what the cover is going to be, but going to the bookstore, looking at things, that's really helpful for me to understand where you see your book in the world.
Mhm.
And yeah, that initial meeting, I also your book was so clear, right? Like your
Thank
brand,
you.
but I think that that's really helpful. Like you
Uh-huh.
knew what your project was. Um, it was super clear. And
Mhm.
so, and I think you even had like throughout your writing visual metaphors of like a celebration or balloon. And so that
Mhm.
immediately I was like, okay, there needs to be something on this cover that really signals what the book is about. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, those initial things and getting the writer to start to think visually. Like you don't have to be an expert on book covers, like that's my job, but it's good to
Mhm.
kind of start to think about that and hey, why do I like this or not? I even ask people to show me things that are not book covers, like if there's a movie poster you like or a brand that you think is really well done.
Mhm.
I think that's helpful too, just to have that. And then we're on the same page. Like I feel like letting people know, hey, I see what you've shown. I understand where you're going. This makes sense to me. And also I like to do when I talk to authors, like, hey, I see you've picked, 10 covers that are white or like 10 covers that have really bold type. Like, we'll try both of those things because it seems like
Mhm.
I can kind of figure out where the categories are there. So
Yeah.
visual stuff is always helpful. Even when
Oh, yeah.
people do like crappy drawings, I'm like, oh, okay, I could see what you're going for.
I mean, crappy is the word to describe the drawings I gave you for the playbook. I was like, I don't know. This was sad. In fact, I started it and I was like, there is no way I can design this book cover. That moment of insanity was not going to happen.
But like that's the way I work with other creatives. Like I don't pretend to be a photographer. I don't pretend to be an illustrator. I've sent those stick figure drawings to illustrators. I'm like, here, it needs to be this and that. And and then they come back with stuff I couldn't even imagine. So
Right.
I think that's a nice way to work with people, to show like this is what I'm thinking, but also saying like I know I can't execute it, like run with this and
Yeah.
see what
Yeah.
they come up with. Yeah.
Well, so this is the final book cover. Let's see if it shows
Yes.
up. It's not showing the whole thing, but this is the final book cover and it wraps around. And so that was one of my favorite pieces, that on the spine, the
Yeah.
balloons wrap around. And one of the things I've noticed in collaboration is, so we got to like a spec, an idea, and then we started to dig in a little bit more into details.
Yeah.
Like, can we make the subtitle, even if things are what they are, a little brighter so it's a little easier to see? Or can the deflated balloon was really important to me because I talk about that balloons deflate and go away, that it's not always great. And how do we develop joy even when things are what they are? But I have noticed in other processes, sometimes people are like, well, I don't like that font really early on, or they're missing that idea. How do you help people get out of the details? Like, because we did do detail work. How do you
Yeah.
help them do the detail work in the right order?
That's a great question because yeah, sometimes people get hung up on the details early on, or they're like, that's not the right shade of blue. And you're like, okay, well, that's later. And I usually will say, okay, when we go to press, we can pick a Pantone color. We will make sure that the color is, exactly that shade that you want. Yeah, I try to kind of guide when I show people stuff. So I'll say like these first 3 covers are, sans serif type. Like I'll try to give some education too about what you're
Mhm.
looking at, right? Because it's overwhelming and you might not see all the minutia if you're not a designer. So it's like, hey, this is a big idea. I think one of the things we had talked about was something that felt tangible on the cover, which is,
Mhm.
kind of guided the balloons. I like that, you know, uh, visual that feels like you could pick it up off the cover. So yeah, so there were things like that where I would say to a client, like, here's what you're looking at, here's
Mhm.
why. um and then we would get into the minutia where, like, let's say you picked one of the covers and you're like, I really like this because it has a rose on it, and I'm like, okay, she likes the rose, but let's look at the other ones too and see, do you like the typeface on this one? Do you want us to
Mhm.
try that? Because then you can start to Frankenstein things, like maybe
Right.
you really loved the lettering on something, or the color on another one. And then that's where, like, when we were working on Joyosity, like, we tried different color backgrounds,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
we
Mhm.
because that
We
at
had
that
one that was
point.
purple, which
Yeah.
is my favorite color, but we all decided that didn't look right. And in fact, I don't really love the color orange, but it was like my second favorite cover because they just put things together in new ways. And I think that's such the power of allowing the iterative process and not
Yes.
trying to micromanage early on. Like, allow it to show up is such a powerful leadership skill.
Yeah, and the details, like, I think when people say things like, "Well, I don't like that typeface," I always ask, like, "What do you why?" "Oh, okay, it's not bold enough." "Okay, we can solve that in many ways. We could change the typeface, we could make the typeface bolder, we could make it capital." Like, there's a lot of ways that I can solve the problem. I would rather hear what the problem is,
Mm.
um, and then I can show you 5 ways to solve it. So I think that's the thing too. Yeah.
Oh, that is like such a key point about if you're collaborating with people and it's sucking the joy out of you, it is probably because you have not identified the actual problem.
Right.
Because there are always different solutions, but if you're not working on the same problem, you're not going to experience great collaboration. So I'm so glad that you identified that. And
Yeah.
I just want to ask you so many more questions, but it's really time for us to wrap up. And so I'm just so grateful for your expertise, not only just in my particular work on working on these 2 beautiful books covers that you created, but just the expertise around how do we collaborate with people? How do we listen well, giving feedback? It's so helpful to people. So how can people keep up with you and like follow you, do what you're doing? We obviously have your website here, but tell us how to keep up with you.
Yeah, I'm probably most active on Instagram just because it's a visual platform, and I'm always like, I would say my feed is 50% inspiration, some of my work, and then I'm always like posting if there's job openings at cool companies or other creative stuff that's going on. I'm in New York City, so galleries and all that kind of stuff I'm always sharing as well.
Yeah. I do really love your Instagram feed, and because it always is something fun to look at and see, and awards, things that I don't know about, but
Yeah.
it's always enjoyable to me. So I also appreciate your Instagram.
Oh,
And
thanks.
I am really grateful for your expertise. And if you are listening and these ideas sparked something in you, I would love to hear it. What I really hope, as I always have to put my coach hat on at the end, is what is the thing in your collaboration with other people that you want to take away from today's conversation? Is it feedback? Is it the right place for details? Is it getting clear on your message? What are the things that you want to work on for yourself? Because when you understand yourself better, you bring better things to the table and cultivate more joy in the way that you work together with people. And so when we say joy is viral, that is part of why, because you've taken something from yourself and really examined something and started to try to change. That is cultivating something different in your collaboration. So I would love to hear what that is. You can always find me at jennwhitmer.com, Jenn with 2 N's. You can email me at jen@jennwhitmer.com. I play the most on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can find me there. And if this was helpful for you as a leader, I would love for you to share it with somebody, especially if you know a designer who has to work in collaborative. I'm sure they will, collaborative spaces, I'm sure sure they would love this. And if you would rate and subscribe, it helps more leaders find us. And it helps us in this movement of how do we create positive culture with complex people and put joyosity into practice. So, Catherine, thank you for being with us today. I am so grateful for you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jen. This was such a lovely conversation.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here.